News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman. The White House says the U.S. will hold direct talks with Iran in Islamabad, Pakistan, starting on Saturday, with Vice President J.D. Vance expected to lead the American delegation. Both sides so far have appeared to have paused strikes across the region after President Trump's announcement of a truce after nearly 6 weeks of fighting. Lebanon remains a potential stumbling block to negotiations, as Iran has warned continued Israeli strikes on Iran's proxy Hezbollah could render talks meaningless. Vice President J.D. Vance, though, says the U.S. never agreed to include Lebanon in the ceasefire.
If Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice.
That's Vice President J.D. Vance. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has announced he has agreed to direct talks with Lebanon, saying, quote, "In light of Lebanon's repeated calls to open direct negotiations with Israel, I instructed the cabinet yesterday to open direct negotiations with Lebanon as soon as possible." The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is little changed, even as a handful of Chinese vessels lined up to exit the Gulf. Iran said earlier that any ships wanting to pass through will need Army approval. Iran's Ports and Maritime Organization published 2 safe routes for shipping, but ship owners continue to wait for clarification on the status of the crucial waterway. Right now, more than 800 freighters are stuck, with just 3 ships observed leaving the region on Wednesday. Ship tracking data compiled by Bloomberg shows in normal times about 135 vessels cross daily. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spoke in Washington today after meeting privately with President Trump Wednesday evening. Rutte says Europe will have to take more responsibility in the alliance.
Europe is assuming a greater and fairer share of the task of providing for its conventional defense. And from that, there will be no going back, and nor should there be. This is a move from unhealthy codependence to a transatlantic alliance grounded in true partnership.
Rutte also admitted that some NATO allies may have dragged their feet when the U.S. asked for some assistance.
When it came time to provide the logistical and other support the United States needed in Iran, some allies were a bit slow, to say the least.
That's NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Elevated oil prices from the Iran war are raising fears of stagflation in the market. The White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett says he still sees the economy growing by 4 to 5% this year, thanks to deregulation and tax cuts.
We just got advanced durables numbers that said that orders for capital goods and shipments of capital goods are at an all-time high. All of that is happening because of optimism that President Trump not only will resolve this in the short term, but in the long term, his policies are going to create a golden age.
White House economic advisor Kevin Hassett making the comments on Fox Business. We check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow is up over 0.5%, S&P 500 up around 0.2%, while the Nasdaq has gained around 0.75%. The 10-year Treasury yield is at 4.268%. The 2-year yield is at 3.747%. Intel with some big news as a chip maker says Google has committed to using future generations of its Xeon processors and other chips. As part of the agreement, the search engine giant will customize Intel's IPUs, or infrastructure processing units. Intel stock rose as much as 3.6%, adding to a rally of around 20% this week. The Justice Department has opened an investigation into the NFL for alleged anti-competitive practices harmful to consumers. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. A bipartisan group of congressmen have written to the Department of Justice and the Federal Communications Commission detailing the high costs consumers pay due to the league's deals with cable channels and streaming services. The NFL has historically been protected from some antitrust regulations by the Sports Broadcasting Act of 1961. The NFL says it has always put fans, quote, front and center, as well as its model being the, quote, most fan and broadcaster friendly. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.